This play is sponsored by the California Civil Liberties Public Education Program, a state-funded grant project of the California State Library.
Now, LA Theatre Works continues our production of Judgment at Nuremberg by Abby Mann.
Mrs. Halbestadt, I wonder if I could... Oh, hello.
Hello?
Your Honor, this is Mrs. Berthold. This is His Honor, Judge Haywood. Mrs. Berthold, this was her house. She came to get some of her belongings from the basement. I didn't know she was coming tonight.
It's my responsibility, Mrs. Halbestadt. Your Honor, I have just been storing some things in the basement until I could get a room big enough to keep them. I hope you don't mind.
No, not at all.
You can check what I have here, if you like.
No, of course not.
Thank you. I'll just take these out. Thank you, Mrs. Halbestadt.
But let me help you with that.
It's perfectly all right. I can manage. It's full of books and pictures and I don't know what. Things that mean nothing to anyone except to me.
Tell the driver to take her home.
Yes, Your Honor. I'll take it, Mrs. Berthold.
Thank you. I hope you are comfortable here.
Yes, I am. Very.
My favorite spot was always the garden. Remind Mrs. Halbestadt to take good care of it. You'll get a great deal of pleasure out of it in the summer. Good night.
Good night. Mrs. Halbestadt, you worked for Mrs. Berthold, didn't you?
Yes, Your Honor.
How long did she live here?
Mrs. Berthold and her family have lived here for generations, Your Honor.
Thanks.
Your Honor, you came in here for something.
Oh, yes, I was going to make myself a sandwich.
I'll make it for you, Your Honor. I'll make anything you want.
No, it's nothing. I always did it for myself back home.
What would you like? We have some ham and some tongue and some liver sausage.
Well, I'll try that liver sausage.
Oh.
That's very kind of you. What was it like to live under National Socialism?
What was it like?
What was it like day to day? You're just like people back home. You're good people. I know that. What was it like for you to live under Hitler?
Oh, we were not political. I am not political.
I know, but you must have been aware of some of the events that were going on. A lot of things were going on. There were parades going on. Hitler and Goebbels used to come here every year. What was it like?
We never attended meetings, never.
I'm not putting you on trial, Mrs. Halbestadt. I'd just like to know.
Here you are, Your Honor.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Your Honor.
For instance, there's a place just 80 miles from here called Dachau.
We knew nothing about it. Nothing about it. How can you ask if we knew anything about it?
I'm sorry.
Is the sandwich all right, Your Honor?
Yes, that's fine, thank you.
Your Honor, we are just little people. I lost a son in the war. I lost a daughter in the bombing. We went hungry during the war. It was terrible for us.
I'm sure it was.
Hitler did some good things. I won't say he didn't do some good things. He gave more people work. No, I won't say he didn't do some good things. But the bad things, the things they say he did to the Jews and the rest, we didn't know about such things. Very few Germans knew. And if we did know, what could we do?
But Mrs. Halbestadt, you said you didn't know. Mrs. Berthold, what was Mrs. Berthold's reaction to all of this?
Mrs. Berthold is a very fine woman, Your Honor.
What about her husband?
He was in the army.
Oh, what happened to him?
He was a defendant in the Malmedy case, Your Honor.
General Berthold? Carl Berthold?
He was executed, Your Honor.
Yes, I know that.
The seamstress Annie Much, daughter of Wilhelm Much, is to be sterilized. It is therefore requested...
Your Honor, defense objects to introduction of these documents. According to the ruling of the first tribunal, such documents are not admissible unless supported by independent evidence of their authenticity.
Objection sustained.
Your Honor, may I ask the defense a question? Would evidence on sterilization be acceptable if there were a witness?
Yes, it would.
Prosecution calls the witness, Rudolph Peterson.
Will you raise your right hand and repeat after me the following oath? I swear by God, the Almighty and Omniscient, that I will speak the pure truth and will withhold and add nothing.
I swear by God, the Almighty and Omniscient, that I will speak the pure truth and will withhold and add nothing.
Will you please tell the court your full name and place of residence?
Rudolph Peterson... Rudolph Peterson, Frankfurt am Main.
And what is your occupation?
I'm a baker's helper.
Are your parents living?
No, they are not.
What were the causes of their deaths? Were they natural causes?
Yes, natural causes.
Mr. Peterson, to what political party did your parents belong in 1933?
The Communist Party.
And how old were you at the time?
About 17.
Now, Mr. Peterson, do you remember anything unusual that happened in 1933 before the Nazis came to power?
Yes. Yes, sir. Some SA men broke into our house. They smashed all the doors and the windows and called us all traitors and beat up my father. My brothers and I drove the men out of our house and turned them over to the police.
Did the police do anything about the matter?
No.
Why not?
They had elections at that time. The National Socialists had come to power.
And now, would you tell the tribunal what happened after 1933, when the Nazis had come to power?
I got a job on a farm, but for the work it was necessary to drive a truck. I went to the town hall to apply for a license.
And what happened?
They took me to an official. He was one of the men who broke into our house. He told me that an examination would be necessary.
Where was the examination to take place?
The District Court of Stuttgart.
And who was the presiding judge in this court?
Justice Friedrich Hoffstetter.
What happened in the courtroom?
They asked me when Adolf Hitler and Dr. Goebbels were born.
And what did you reply?
I told them I didn't know and I didn't care either.
Mr. Peterson, do you recognize this piece of paper?
Yes, sir, yes, I do.
Would you read it to the tribunal?
District Court of Stuttgart. You are requested to present yourself within 2 weeks at one of the hospitals mentioned before to be sterilized. If you do not betake yourself voluntarily, you will be taken by force.
Now, Mr. Peterson, would you read what is written below Justice Hoffstetter's signature?
Yes, by the authority of Ernst Janning, Ministry of Justice.
Mr. Peterson, what did you do after you received this letter?
I ran away, but the police got me and took me to a hospital.
And what happened at the hospital?
They kept me there by force. A nurse came in who was supposed to prepare me for the operation, and she told me that the whole thing was terrible. Then the doctor came in who was supposed to operate on me and told me that the whole thing was a shame, a disgrace.
And were you, in fact, sterilized?
Yes, sir.
That's all.
Defense counsel will cross-examine.
Mr. Peterson, you worked as a baker's helper.
Yes.
What other occupations have you held?
I have worked for my father.
What did your father do?
He was a railroad worker.
What did he do?
He carried signal cards on the railroads.
Mr. Peterson, you spoke about your brothers. How many brothers do you have?
5.
How many sisters?
4.
4. Then you are a family of 10.
Yes, 10.
What occupation do your brothers have?
They are all laborers.
Laborers?
Yes.
I see. How long did you attend school, Mr. Peterson?
6 years.
6 years? Why not longer?
I didn't want to attend longer. I wanted to go to work.
Would you consider yourself a very bright fellow at school?
I don't remember what happened at school.
Your Honor, I offer as evidence the petition that came from the court in Stuttgart. I would like to read to you the efficiency report made at the school about Mr. Peterson. He failed to be promoted and was placed in a class of backward children.
Objection, Your Honor. The witness's school record has nothing to do with his sterilization.
It was the task of the health court to order sterilization of the mentally incompetent.
Objection overruled.
Did your parents die of natural causes?
Yes.
Would you describe the illness your mother died of?
She died of heart disease.
During the last stages of her illness, did your mother show any mental peculiarities?
No.
In a decision that came from the court in Stuttgart, it is stated that your mother suffered from hereditary feeble-mindedness.
That's a lie.
Could you give us some clarification as to how the hereditary health court at Stuttgart arrived at that decision?
It was just something they said to get me on the operating table.
It was just something they said?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson, you said the court in Stuttgart asked you two questions, the birth date of Hitler and Dr. Goebbels.
Yes.
What else did they ask you?
Nothing else.
Are you sure?
Yes, I am sure.
Mr. Peterson, there was a simple test that the court used to ask in all cases of possible mental incompetence. Since you say they did not ask you then, perhaps you can answer it now. Form a sentence out of the words Hare, Hunter, and Field.
Objection, Your Honor.
Mr. Peterson, was the court at Stuttgart constituted like this? Was there an audience?
Yes, there was an audience.
Objection overruled.
Hare, Hunter, and Field, Mr. Peterson. Take your time.
Herr Hunter and Field. Herr Hunter Field. They all made up their minds before I entered the courtroom. They all made up their minds. They took me to that hospital and they kept me there just like a criminal, and I couldn't say anything. I just had to lay there. And my mother was a very hardworking, very good woman all her life. It's not fair to say things about her. I have a picture. Your Honor, I would like to show it to you. I would like you to look at it. I would like you to judge whether my mother was feeble-minded or not. I want you to tell me if she was feeble-minded, my mother. Was she feeble-minded? Was she?
It is my duty to point out to the tribunal that the witness is not in control of his mental processes.
I am not. I know I am not. Since that day, I am half of what I've ever been, but I wasn't this way before.
The tribunal does not know the way you were before. It can never know. It only has your word.
They have the greatest strudel here I've ever tasted.
It's good, but I'm getting a little bit tired of it. A little bit with this music, too. Don't they ever change their repertoire? Must have heard this tune 1,000 times.
Just a minute. Mrs. Berthold, won't you come over? This is Mrs. Berthold, Judge Haywood.
We've met. Hello.
Hello again.
Won't you join us for a drink?
Oh, thank you.
Please do.
Another round for the table?
What would you like?
What are you having?
Well, I've had my fill of beer, so...
Why don't you try a local wine? Sonnenberg or Schwalbenwinkel. Schwalbenwinkel.
I'll have some of that.
I'll have the same, thank you.
Danke sehr.
I hope you got home all right that night.
Yes, I did, thank you. I don't know how I would have managed without the car.
You speak English very well.
Oh, my husband and I spent some years in America.
Really?
I hope you've been able to see some of Nuremberg.
Well, mainly the road from my house to... from your house to the Palace of Justice. And the parts that deal with the case, of course. The historical aspects.
The Nazi aspects. You should see some of the other parts. It's been here a long time, long before Hitler.
I was in the old section once. We've been so busy. What would you suggest?
There's the market square. Oh, and there are many beautiful things in the old part of Nuremberg. There are even museums we are trying to rebuild.
Oh.
If you like classical music, there is a piano concert next week at the old opera house. Arthur Reis, he was a refugee from Hitler in the early days. The committee persuaded him to come back. It ought to be quite an evening. Would you like to come?
Yes, I would.
I'll tell them to leave a ticket at the box office for you. I'm on the committee.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Berthold.
Oh, it's nothing. You see, I have a mission with Americans.
What's that?
To convince you that we are not all monsters.
Good evening, Colonel Parker.
Good evening, Mrs. Berthold.
I hope you'll excuse me.
But you've just come, Mrs. Berthold.
I must go. Please excuse me. Good night.
Good night.
Mrs. Berthold doesn't harbor a burning passion for me. I prosecuted her husband.
There are many people who think that a death sentence wouldn't be passed against General Berthold today.
I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are people who think that all the prisoners in Nuremberg should be free today. I've had one or two too many, as might be painfully obvious to you. The spectacle this afternoon with Mr. Peterson put me off my feed. Sorry.
The trouble with you, Colonel, is that you'd like to indict the whole country. Now, that might be emotionally satisfying for you, but it's not exactly practical, and hardly fair.
Hare, hunter, field. Let's be fair. The hare was shot by the hunter in the field. It's really quite simple.
We really shouldn't be discussing this, Colonel.
There are no Nazis in Germany. Didn't you know that, Judge? The Eskimos invaded Germany and took over. That's how all those terrible things happened. It wasn't the fault of the Germans. It was those damned Eskimos.
You know, that's one problem with the prosecution. It's filled with radicals like Parker.
Is that what Colonel Parker is? A radical?
He was a personal protege of FDR.
That makes him a radical?
As a matter of fact, I've been wondering how you stand, Dan.
Well, I'll clarify that for you, Curtis. I'm a rock-ribbed Southern Republican who thinks Roosevelt was a great man.
Oh, one of those.
Did you hear what's going on?
What?
The Russians have entered Czechoslovakia. President Mazarek committed suicide.
Good
and the
God.
country's under martial law. We're sending some units up to the border.
Well, this is it. The end of the Grand Alliance. I knew it was coming anyway.
Curtis, I wonder whether we should send our wives home.
It's not that bad yet, Ken, is it?
The Czech border's only 60 miles away.
Supposing they decide to come over the border.
They're not saying they're going to do that, are they?
What difference does it make what they say? Nobody thought they'd take over Czechoslovakia. I always thought this was the real danger anyway.
What the hell does that mean?
We should have kept out of the whole thing and let them destroy each other.
That's an interesting viewpoint, Curtis.
Where has it gotten us? We're in for a life and death struggle, and who is the key to who wins that struggle? Germany. Any high school student in geography can tell you that.
Now, wait a minute.
Excuse me, gentlemen. More strudel?
This is LA TheaterWorks' production of Judgment at Nuremberg by Abby Mann.
This play is sponsored by the California Civil Liberties Public Education Program, a state-funded grant project of the California State Library.
Our story continues next time. I'm Susan Lowenberg, producing director of LA TheaterWorks.